The humans were about to unleash ancient powers that utterly terrified the alien adversaries. James Allen woke abruptly in his bunk on the CSS Deliverance to the blare of alarm claxons and flashing red lights. He hastily donned his uniform and dashed for the bridge with Dean O'Brien, his bunkmate and fellow ex-Navy SEAL, running alongside him. On the bridge, Ambassador Pryer, an Arcturian, was hunched over the sensor displays, his blue skin appearing pale. Captain Akio Tanaka gripped the command chair tightly. Tanaka looked up grimly as James and Dean entered. Long-range sensors had detected an unknown fleet heading for Earth at impossible speeds. "It's the Crocs Dominion," Pryer choked out, his voice trembling with dread and old trauma. "They enslaved my people long ago. An ancient alliance of races had stopped them before, but now they had escaped. Humanity, having joined the galactic community only 5 years ago, lagged technologically behind. The Crocs will reach Earth in 3 weeks, Tanaka said heavily. We're 8 months away at maximum FTL. I'm ordering us back to warn them, he said, though they all knew it was hopeless. James and Dean shared a grim look. Earth needed a miracle. Gripping the bridge railings, they watched as the CSS Deliverance jolted out of FTL. The view of Earth filled the screens, sending chills down their spines. Crocs warships swarmed like locusts, raining down devastation on the surface. Holy Mother of God! Dean breathed as hundreds of Crocs landing craft disgorged reptilian shock troops. The soldiers, towering 12 feet tall, surged through the rubble, mowing down human defenders with plasma rifles. James zoomed in on a feed of Earth's defense fleet engaging the Crocs. It was like watching rowboats against a tsunami. Human ships were torn apart effortlessly, and life pods were vaporized by precise point defense fire. Where is the Arcturian fleet? James demanded, but static was the only response. They've abandoned us, Tanaka said grimly, protecting their own borders. We have to help them, James insisted, but Tanaka ordered them to stand down, emphasizing the need to regroup, study the enemy, and strike when they actually had a chance. James clenched his fists white on the guardrail, torn between the urge to charge in and the necessity of patience. Cursed, yet his cold, ruthless logic kept his hand from action. Hide us in the Or cloud, Captain, he ground out. We've got work to do. The following 2 months etched new lines on their faces as they witnessed the Crocs systematically dismantle Earth. The enemy methodically wiped out power plants, factories, and communication hubs. Legions of enslaved humans were shuffled into ships, destined for unknown, nightmarish fates. Despite the constant churn of helplessness, the Deliverance crew conducted stealth recon. They logged Crocs' patrol patterns, intercepted communications, and mapped supply lines. James analyzed the intelligence, searching for any weakness to exploit. A snippet of a transmission caught his eye, prompting him to enhance it. Triangulating the coordinates, he pulled up a satellite view of Chile's Atacama Desert. Concealed under camo netting was an archaeological dig site swarming with Crocs. Captain, you need to see this, James insisted, zooming in on the dig site. He observed the heavy Crocs presence, with Praetorian guards, the Dominion's elite soldiers, patrolling the perimeter. Pryer voiced his concern about the scans, suspecting the site matched the profiles of top-secret Crocs research stations dedicated to unlocking forbidden xenotech. James turned to Captain Tanaka, proposing a strike while the Crocs were distracted. Tanaka hesitated, acknowledging the risk, but ultimately agreed, cautioning them to abort if compromised. James and Dean prepared in grim silence, equipping themselves with weapons and armor. As they strapped into the stealth shuttle, memories of their past missions surfaced. The night was devoid of moonlight as they approached the dig site, the shuttle's ablative coating masking their presence. Emerging into the chill desert air, they moved silently towards the perimeter, cloaking fields shimmering around them. Planting remote detonation charges at critical junctures, they proceeded with their mission. In the defenses, sweat dripped down James's neck as he armed the last charge, his fingers steady on the controls. A crack of rock made them freeze. A Crocs patrol lumbered into view, heading straight for them. James and Dean hunkered down, scarcely daring to breathe. At the last second, James keyed the detonator. The night erupted in thunder and flame, causing alarm among the Croc soldiers as the charges ripped through the perimeter, opening up a narrow gap. Go! James hissed, and they sprinted for the breach as the guards rushed to repel an attack from outside, unaware of the true threat behind their lines. Reaching the smoking edge of the hole, James and Dean dove through, rolling to their feet inside the dig site just as the perimeter force field snapped back into place. CL alarms blared as Priorians charged towards the disturbance. James and Dean melted into the shadows of the nearest tunnel entrance, their cloaking fields bending the light around them. "No turning back now," Dean murmured. James nodded, stone-faced and determined. They still had a superweapon to find and a world to save. Creeping through the tunnels, James and Dean relied on their cloaking fields, the walls pressing close and the air heavy with a metallic tang. Dean pulled out his scanner, puzzled by its readings. They rounded a bend and stumbled into a massive chamber, where alien devices jutted from the walls, pulsing with eerie light. In the center of the room, a hulking Croc Praetorian loomed over a steel slab, where a human captive lay strapped down, writhing in agony. The Croc seized a wicked-looking instrument, its blade humming with malevolent energy, and slashed the prisoner open callously. Enraged and nauseated, James lined up his rifle sights on the Croc's skull, pulling the trigger as it reached for a glowing cylinder. The shot punched through the alien's head, and it collapsed like a puppet with cut strings. Approaching the artifacts, James and Dean were transfixed by the hypnotic whirls of light. Declan raised his scanner, which shrieked and sparked, its housing melting. Eldritch symbols on the artifacts flared with searing radiance, and a concussive pulse erupted through the chamber, hurling James and Dean into the far wall. Shards rained down, ripping through their cloaking fields. James shook his head, ears ringing, as he looked at the remains of his cloak, now exposed. Alarms howled, and blast doors closed with a rumble. James snagged the fallen Croc's crystal cylinder and sprinted for the narrowing gap, with Dean on his heels. They dove through just before the door crashed down. In the Deliverance's main lab, James tossed the Croc cylinder to Pryer, who scanned its surface, his face drawn and pale. "These glyphs, they match no language I've ever seen," he said, his gaze meeting James's. "But the oldest stories of my people speak of such markings. They're associated with the forbidden powers that broke the Crocs long ago. For those same stories say the forbidden powers were locked away for a reason because they didn't just threaten the Crocs. They threatened the very fabric of the universe itself." Mike Allen crouched behind the twisted remains of a burnt-out car, the acrid stench of smoke and death heavy in the air. The once gleaming towers of Chicago rose like broken teeth against the blood-red sky, shattered windows staring down like accusing eyes. He checked the charge on his jury-rigged plasma rifle, cobbled together from salvaged scraps. Charges set on the supply depot crackled as Sarah, his second-in-command, signaled readiness over the radio. "Ready to blow it on your command," she reported. "Copy that," Mike replied, steeling himself. "We go in hard and fast. Get those collars and get out." He signaled to his team, a ragtag band of survivors turned guerrilla fighters. They moved out, darting from cover to cover through the rubble-strewn streets. As they neared the depot, the ground shook with a thunderous boom. The depot's walls buckled and collapsed in a roiling cloud of smoke and debris. Claxons blared as the Crocs guards scrambled to respond. "Go, go, go!" Mike shouted, sprinting through the breach. They swarmed the loading bay, plasma bolts sizzling through the air. Mike took down a guard with a shot to the head, the reptilian body toppling like a felled tree. His team laid down covering fire as he hacked the lock on the storage container. The doors hissed open, revealing crates of neural collars. "Jackpot," Mike grinned. "Bag them and tag them, people." They loaded the collars onto hover dollies and beat a hasty retreat, detonating pre-planted charges to collapse the tunnels behind them and cover their escape. Back at their underground hideout, Mike set to work modifying the collars, his fingers flying over the circuitry with practiced ease. "With these, we can free more people from Croc's control," he said, holding up a hacked collar. "Get them fighting for the right side again." They distributed the collars to collaborators, humans who pretended to serve the Crocs while secretly working for the resistance. One by one, people tore off their slave collars with fierce joy, embracing their liberators. Mike felt a surge of hope. Maybe, just maybe, they could turn the tide. But the feeling was short-lived. A week later, an alarm screeched through the base. Mike grabbed his rifle and sprinted for the command center, where Sarah met him at the door, her face grim. "The Crocs found us," she said tightly. "They're coming in heavy. We have to evacuate." Cold dread settled in Mike's gut as he scanned the security feeds. Croc's death squads poured into the tunnels, led by Liam, a freed colonist from the raid. Mike realized with bitter disappointment that Liam must have been a plant all along. There was no time for regrets now. "Wipe the computers," he ordered. Purge everything. I'll trigger the self-destruct to seal the lower levels and buy us time to evacuate. What about you? Sarah demanded. I'll be right behind you, Mike lied, bitterness coating his words. She hesitated for a moment longer, searching his face, then nodded curtly and hurried out. Mike armed the self-destruct sequence with hands that barely shook. The base shuddered as blast doors slammed down and charges detonated in the lower tunnels, buying precious seconds. He was about to make a break for it when a concussive blast threw him to the floor, ears ringing. Looking up, he found himself staring into the barrel of a plasma rifle. Liam standing over him, flanked by a squad of Crocs soldiers. Surrender, Liam intoned flatly, and your death will be quick. Mike emitted a bloody, bitter laugh. Go to hell, he spat as he lunged for the self-destruct panel. White-hot pain exploded in his shoulder as a plasma bolt punched through flesh and bone. Darkness crashed over him like a wave. When Mike clawed his way back to consciousness, he found himself shackled to a metal chair, cold and unyielding. His whole body throbbed with agony, a dozen wounds screaming. Before him stood a hulking Croc in ornate armor, the planetary Overlord. It seized Mike's jaw in a crushing grip, forcing his head back. The location of your resistant strongholds, the names of your leaders. You will give me everything, it demanded. Mike spat a bloody glob onto the polished armor. The Croc snarled and delivered a bone-crunching blow to his face, causing him to black out momentarily. When he regained awareness, he felt icy metal against his ravaged throat. A neural collar. The Overlord was fitting him with a collar, not one of the mass-produced models, but a sleek, high-security device of unfamiliar design. Agony exploded through every nerve as the Overlord input a code, and Mike convulsed, screaming as his muscles locked up, tendons stretched tortuously. The collar wormed into his mind, ripping through his mental defenses. Contact your brother, the Overlord commanded, its voice echoing in Mike's skull. Lure him to these coordinates. Tell him you have vital intelligence to share in person. Mike gritted his teeth, blood running down his chin. He wouldn't betray James, not even to save himself. He focused every scrap of will on resisting the insidious presence boring into his brain, but the pain became overwhelming. His body moved without his permission, jerky and puppet-like. Helpless, he watched as his hands worked the comp panel, entering James's private frequency. James's beloved face appeared on the screen, eyes widening in shocked joy. Mikey! James breathed, something raw and desperate in his voice. You're alive. God, I thought I'd lost you. Mike tried to force out a warning, to scream at James to run, but the collar forced him to smile, the expression ghastly and stretched. I'm alive, his treacherous mouth said. I escaped, James. I have critical information. I can't risk sharing it over comms. I need you to meet me at these coordinates. Come alone. We can't let the Crocs catch wind of this. James nodded, his jaw tight. I'll be there. Stay safe, little brother. I'm bringing you home. The call cut out, and Mike slumped in his bonds, despair crashing over him. The Overlord watched him struggle with a cruel, calculating look. Your brother will come for you, it said with vicious satisfaction. And when he does, we will have the artifacts, the key to unlocking the forbidden powers. Mike could only pray that James would see through the deception in time. The fate of humanity hung in the balance. On the bridge of the CSS Deliverance, James stood staring at the darkened comm screen, his mind racing. Something was wrong, he knew it in his bones. The stiff set of Mike's shoulders, the unnatural cadence of his words. James had seen the signs before. The Crocs had Mike. He slammed a fist on the console, welcoming the bright flare of pain. Dean and Pryer watched him wearily, their faces etched with worry. It's a trap, James said heavily. They equipped him with a high-grade neural collar, probably linked directly to the local Overlord. Dean swore. That means they know about the artifacts. Why else couldn't just kill him? They seek to use your bond of blood against you, Pryer said, his eyes conveying something bleak and knowing. To draw us out and seize the relics. James paced the deck, his mind whirling. If the Crocs got their hands on the Xenotech, it was game over. They'd crack the secrets of the forbidden powers, and the whole galaxy would burn. But he couldn't abandon Mike to those monsters, not again. And we can't give them what they want, Captain Tanaka said grimly. The artifacts are too dangerous. We have to destroy them. I know. James dragged a hand over his stubbled jaw. A desperate idea crystallized in his mind. And we will, right in front of their scaly faces. He turned to his crew, a reckless fire burning in his eyes. I have a plan. We keep the rendezvous. I'll go in alone. Make the Crocs think I'm handing over the relics. Pryer, I need you to rig a destruct sequence inside the containment cylinder. Something I can trigger remotely at the right moment. Pryer nodded slowly. I can do that. But, James, you realize this is a one-way trip. Once the Crocs realize you've destroyed the artifacts, I know the risks. James cut him off. I'm not asking any of you to come with me. This is my choice, my brother, my mission. Like hell, Dean growled. I've been watching your back since basic. Not going to stop now. Nor will I, Pryer said firmly. Your cause is my own. I will not abandon you to face the Crocs alone. Emotion swelled in James's throat, too big to force past his teeth. He clasped arms with Dean. Then Pryer, Brotherhood and resolve thrumming between them like a living current. All right then, he said roughly. Let's go get my brother back and show these Crocs bastards what happens when you mess with humanity. James and Dean crept into the ruined stadium, the shattered concrete and twisted metal casting eerie shadows in the fading light. In the center stood Mike, rigid and unnatural, surrounded by the hulking forms of a full Crocs battalion. Towering over them all was the Overlord itself, a monstrous figure encased in ornate gravity armor that warped the very air around it. James's stomach knotted with dread. This had trap written all over it. But what choice did he have? He couldn't abandon Mike, not again. He met Dean's eyes, saw his own grim determination reflected back. They advanced slowly, hands near their weapons, as they approached. James keyed a sequence into his cybernetic arm, activating the miniaturized EMP emitter concealed within, a desperate gamble. But if he could just disable Mike's collar. The device pulsed, but Mike didn't even flinch. James's heart sank as he realized the truth. The Overlord had upgraded the collars after the Resistance's hacking campaign. The EMP shielding was too strong. The relics, Mike, said James, his voice heavy with resignation. Mike raised his weapon, aiming it squarely at James. Hand them over. James looked into his brother's eyes and saw only the blank obedience of Crocs' control. In that moment, he knew with icy certainty what he had to do. Forgive me, he whispered, his fingers stabbing down on the detonator. The stadium erupted in a cataclysm of fire and plasma, the charges Dean had planted ripping through the Crocs' front lines. For a searing instant, James saw Mike silhouetted against the flames, and then he was gone, vaporized in the maelstrom. Croc soldiers charged through the smoke, plasma rifles blazing. James and Dean dove for cover, returning fire with grim efficiency. But it was like fighting the tide. For every reptilian form that crumpled, 3 more surged forward. James broke free from cover, racing for higher ground. A hammer round slammed into his chest like a miniature black hole, crushing the breath from his lungs and sending him flying. He crashed into the bleachers, feeling something crack deep in his back amidst a starburst of agony. Through swimming vision, he saw the Crocs closing in, the Overlord striding at their head. James fumbled for the crystal cylinder, his fingers clumsy and numb. He armed his suit self-destruct, a savage smile on his lips. If this was the end, he'd take the relic with him. The Crocs would never claim their prize. The countdown hit 0. James braced for oblivion, but instead of searing heat, there was only blinding light. The explosion stopped, contained in a crackling force field. The cylinder blazed like a captured star in his hands. Something ancient and vast brushed against James's mind, a presence that made his skull ache with its immensity. The world fell away, and he plunged into a kaleidoscope of visions. Cities of impossible geometry beneath strange skies, worlds devoured by nightmarish forces, galaxies ripped asunder. Your need is great, a voice echoed from the cosmic well, cold and pitiless as the void between stars. Your conviction is absolute, but to unleash what you seek, there is a price. Will you pay it? James thought of Mike, of Earth in chains, of the Crocs and their insatiable hunger. His jaw clenched. Yes, he gritted out, blood on his teeth. Anything. Power surged through him, remaking him cell by cell. His broken body knitted itself back together, muscles and bones laced with cosmic fire. He rose from the rubble, limbed in coruscating silver, eyes blazing with eldritch light. Then let the universe tremble. The presence intoned, as unimaginable energies poured into James. The relic's prison shattered. He ascended, wreathed in flames of purest white, as the Crocs fell back in terror before the forbidden power made flesh. The Crocs Overlord staggered back, its gravity armor whining as it compensated for the sudden movement. Its eyes widened in shocked recognition, mandibles slack with disbelief. "No," it hissed, fear and awe warring in its voice. "It cannot be. The Forbidden Ones were destroyed eons ago." James rose from the rubble like a phoenix from the ashes, his form limned in shimmering silver light, raw power crackling across his skin, ancient glyphs searing themselves into his flesh. "Are you sought to enslave us?" he intoned, his gaze boring into the Overlord. "To strip us of our freedom and dignity. But in your arrogance, you failed to grasp the depths of our resolve." James strode forward, the very air warping around him, the Croc soldiers shrinking back. "We will pay any price, bear any burden, to protect our world and our people." His eyes blazed supernova bright. "And now you will learn the true cost of your folly." He raised a hand, fingers splayed. The Crocs opened fire, but their weapons winked out of existence inches from his skin, swallowed by tendrils of silver fire. James clenched his fist, and a wave of annihilating force exploded outward, atomizing the Crocs where they stood. Only the Overlord remained, staggering and smoking, its armor pitted and warped. It turned to flee, but James seized it with coils of crackling starfire, dragging it back. The Overlord writhed in his telekinetic grip, its mind crumbling as James ripped through its psyche, absorbing lifetimes of stolen knowledge, seeing the secret heart of the Crocs Empire. A bleak and airless moon, riddled with labyrinthine vaults containing countless relics of dead civilizations, all imbued with the eldritch energies of the forbidden powers, waited to be cracked open and exploited. With this knowledge, the Crocs' conquest of the galaxy would be terrifyingly absolute. James released the Overlord's desiccated husk, letting it crumple to the shattered earth. He turned to Dean, who stood pale and shaken, his rifle dangling forgotten from his fingers as he stared at his transformed friend. "The Crocs have already begun reverse engineering the relics they've plundered from Earth," James said, his voice grim as tombstones. "If they succeed in unlocking the forbidden powers for themselves, the galaxy will be consumed by eternal darkness." His jaw set, resolve etched into every reforged line of him. "We must stop them, no matter the cost." Dean swallowed hard but nodded, squaring his shoulders. He understood the stakes, the yawning abyss that threatened to swallow everything they held dear. They made their way back to the CSS Deliverance, leaving the charnel house of the battlefield behind. The crew could only gape as James strode onto the bridge, cosmic energy still coursing beneath his skin. Stunned whispers chased his footsteps, a mix of awe and instinctive, bone-deep terror. Pryer pulled James aside, his craggy face lined with concern. "James, you must be careful," he urged. "The forbidden powers are a double-edged sword that could corrupt even the noblest intentions. They have a will of their own, and it does not always align with the users." James met Pryor's gaze steadily, starlight dancing in his eyes. "I hear you, my friend," he said. "But this power is the only way to save my people and end the Crocs' threat once and for all. I didn't choose this path, but I'll be damned if I don't see it through to the end." Pryor sighed but clapped James on the shoulder, recognizing the iron beneath his words. The CSS Deliverance set course for the heart of Croc space, a lone spark of defiance hurtling into the jaws of darkness. As they traversed the long light years, scattered reports filtered in from Earth. The resistance was rallying, emboldened by whispered legends of a human imbued with the power of the gods. In the slave pens and labor camps, in the ruins of shattered cities, a forbidden hope rekindled in the hearts of the oppressed. But James knew this was only the beginning. The true crucible awaited them at the end of this cold and lonely road, on a dead moon where the secrets of the cosmos lay entombed in ancient vaults. And the price of victory, of saving everything he held dear, may be higher than he ever imagined. James felt it in his bones, a sickening twist of the cosmic energies that now surged through his veins. The Crocs had begun their dark ritual, siphoning the life force of enslaved humans to fuel their eldritch ambitions. If they succeeded in unlocking the forbidden powers, the galaxy would be nothing more than a lifeless husk, consumed by an insatiable hunger. He staggered into his quarters, the weight of his power bearing down on him like a collapsing star. His muscles burned, his mind reeled. The burden of his newfound might threaten to crush him. "James." The voice was softer than a whisper, yet it cut through the chaos of his thoughts like a blade. He looked up, his eyes widening as Mike stood before him, translucent and shimmering with an ethereal light. James shook his head, certain his mind was playing tricks on him. This can't be real. You're gone, he said. I am, Mike said, his spectral form drifting closer. But the bonds of brotherhood transcend even death. His ghostly hand reached out, hovering just above James's shoulder. You're struggling under the weight of your power. It's eating you alive. James clenched his jaw, the cosmic fire in his eyes flaring. I have to do this, Mike. Our people, our planet. I can't let them down, not again. I know your heart, brother. You'd sacrifice everything for the sake of others. But this power, it's not meant for mortal hands. It will devour you, as it has so many before, Mike said, his spectral eyes holding a deep sorrow, a pain that echoed across lifetimes. James pushed himself off the wall, his hands balled into fists. What choice do I have? The Crocs are on the verge of victory. If I don't stop them, you will, Mike said, his form beginning to glow brighter. But not alone. The strength of humanity has always been in our unity, our resilience. You don't have to carry this burden by yourself. Before James could respond, Mike surged forward, his ghostly form merging with James in a blaze of blinding light. James gasped as a surge of energy raced through him, interweaving with the cosmic power that already dwelled within. But there was something else too, a clarity of purpose, a renewed sense of focus. When the light faded, James stood tall, his eyes clear and determined. He strode onto the bridge of the CSS Deliverance, where his crew awaited him anxiously. We have one chance to stop the Crocs, he said, his voice ringing with authority. We're going to take this ship into the heart of their stronghold, right to the center of their ritual. Dean stepped forward, his brow furrowed. That's suicide, James. We'll never make it past their defenses. We will, James said, a grim smile on his lips. I'll use my power to cloak the ship, get us in undetected. Once we're inside, we split into two teams. Dean, you'll lead a strike force to free the human prisoners and destroy the Crocs Xenotech reserve. Dickon nodded, the lines of his face hardening with resolve. And you, Pryer, James said, his ancient eyes searching Pryor's face. I'll confront the Crocs leadership directly, disrupt their ritual. It's the only way. As the CSS Deliverance breached the blood-soaked skies of the Crocs' homeworld, James stood at the viewport, watching the twisted spires of the enemy's stronghold loom ever closer. The fate of the galaxy would be decided here, in the crucible of the Crocs' dark ambition. He could feel Mike's presence within him, a steadying hand on his shoulder. Together they would face the coming storm, for Earth, for humanity, for the chance of a future free from the shadow of the Crocs. James turned to his crew, a ghost of a smile on his face. Let's go save the goddamn galaxy. He felt the cosmic energy surge through him as the CSS Deliverance pierced the Crocs' stronghold defenses with a roar of defiance. He unleashed a cataclysmic blast of raw power, annihilating the outer walls and carving a path straight to the central ritual chamber. The air crackled with eldritch energy as he strode through the rubble, his eyes blazing with silver fire. There, at the heart of the chamber, stood the Crocs Overlord, now a conduit for the forbidden powers. An aura of pure malevolence radiated from its twisted form, warping the very fabric of reality around it. The Overlord fixed James with a cruel, knowing grin. You're too late, human. It hissed, its voice echoing with the weight of centuries. The ritual is complete. We have ascended, become the harbingers of oblivion itself. Soon, all will be unmade, and the Crocs will reign supreme over the ashes of the universe. James felt the weight of his own power pressing against him, threatening to crush him under its immensity. In that moment, he realized the true scope of his folly. By wielding the forbidden powers so recklessly, he had played directly into the Crocs' hands, accelerating the unraveling of the cosmic balance. The Overlord laughed, a sound that chilled James to his very core. You see now, don't you? The forbidden powers are not a tool to be controlled but a force of pure entropy, a key to unmaking all that is. And you, in your arrogance, have brought us closer to that glorious end. James staggered, the magnitude of his actions crashing down on him like a collapsing star. Despair clawed at his heart, threatening to drag him into an abyss of hopelessness. But in that darkest moment, he felt a presence beside him. The spirit of his brother Mike and the countless others who had given their lives in the fight against the Crocs. Their sacrifice, their unwavering courage in the face of impossible odds, bolstered James's resolve. He knew what had to be done. With a final defiant roar, He unleashed the totality of his cosmic might, pouring every last ounce of his being into a single universe-shattering blast. The Crocs Overlord was engulfed in a maelstrom of primal energy, its form disintegrating into nothingness as the power of the Forbidden Ones consumed it utterly. But James too felt himself unraveling, his essence merging with the fundamental forces he had unleashed. As the ritual chamber collapsed around him, James experienced a moment of perfect clarity. The cosmos stretched out before him, a tapestry of infinite beauty and complexity, and he understood that his sacrifice had bought the galaxy a precious chance, an opportunity to find a new path free from the tyranny of the Crocs and the corrupting influence of the forbidden powers. In his final moments, as his physical form dissipated into the cosmic maelstrom, James felt a profound sense of peace. He had given his life for something greater than himself, ensuring that the flame of hope would continue to burn in the hearts of those who carried on the fight. The CSS Deliverance emerged from the rubble of the Croc stronghold, battered but unbroken. Dean and the crew, their faces lined with a mixture of triumph and grief, were hailed as heroes by the liberated masses. Their actions would be remembered as a shining beacon in a galaxy too long shadowed by oppression and fear. But amidst the celebrations, there was a profound sense of loss, a void that could never be filled. James Allen, the man who had sacrificed everything to save humanity, was gone, his name forever etched into the annals of history. Though the galaxy might never fully comprehend the true extent of his sacrifice, James's legacy would endure, a testament to the indomitable spirit of humanity and the power of a single individual to alter the course of destiny itself. The CSS Deliverance punched through the Earth's atmosphere, its hull still scorched and battered from the climactic battle against the Crocs. Dean stood on the bridge, his gaze fixed on the view screen as the blue marble of his homeworld grew larger. Beside him, the crew buzzed with excitement, their voices a mixture of relief and disbelief. They had achieved the impossible, striking a blow against the Crocs that would echo through generations. Yet, as the ship descended towards the sprawling megalopolis once known as New York City, Dean couldn't shake off a growing sense of unease. The streets below were clogged with debris, skyscrapers lay shattered and crumbling, and smoke still billowed from the ruins, a stark reminder of the savage battle that had unfolded here. Touching down on a makeshift landing pad, the Deliverance, Dean led his crew out into the waiting throng of survivors. They were greeted as heroes, with tears of joy and shouts of triumph. However, Dean couldn't ignore the haunted look in their eyes, the scars that ran deeper than mere physical wounds. In the days that followed, the true scale of the devastation became painfully clear. The Crocs had not only sought conquest but also aimed to eradicate humanity from the galaxy entirely. Entire cities had been leveled, their populations slaughtered or enslaved. The ecosystem itself had been poisoned by the toxic remnants of Croc weaponry. Yet, even as the survivors began to rebuild their shattered lives, Dean knew that the true threat had not passed. The forbidden powers wielded by James still lingered, waiting to be claimed by anyone foolish or desperate enough to seek them. It was Pryer who first proposed a solution during a somber meeting of Earth's remaining leaders. Having witnessed firsthand the destruction wrought by the forbidden powers, he knew they could not be allowed to fall into the wrong hands again. "We must create a new order," he declared, his voice heavy with the weight of centuries. The guardians of the cosmic balance, charged with safeguarding the knowledge of the forbidden powers and ensuring they are never used again. Dean volunteered to be among the first of these guardians, driven by a sense of duty to his fallen friend and a need to atone for the horrors he had witnessed. He threw himself into his new role with grim determination, burying his grief in the endless work of rebuilding and safeguarding. Years turned into decades, and slowly the galaxy began to heal. However, the scars of the Crocs' war ran deep, and Dean knew that the peace they had won was fragile. It was during a routine mission to a remote planet that Dean first heard rumors of a strange artifact, whispered about in hushed tones by the locals. Leading his team of guardians to investigate, they followed the trail to a hidden temple deep in the jungle. There, they encountered a cult unlike any Dean had seen before, its members cloaked in robes of darkest black, chanting in a language that seemed to twist and writhe in the air. At its head stood a figure that made Dean's blood run cold. A gaunt, almost skeletal figure, eyes burning with otherworldly light, yet strangely familiar. Whispering James's name, hardly daring to believe it, Declan watched as the cult leader's smile stretched thin and cruel, devoid of warmth. In a manner of speaking, the cult leader rasped, "I am the reincarnation of James Allen, born anew to wield the power he once possessed." Declan shook his head in disbelief. The James he had known would never have aligned himself with such darkness. Yet, upon closer inspection, he discerned the telltale signs of the forbidden powers coursing through the cult leader's veins. The same cosmic energy that had once burned within his friend. "Join me," the cult leader urged, extending a hand wreathed in eldritch flames. "Together, we can reshape the galaxy in our image, as it was meant to be." For a fleeting moment, Dean wavered. The power offered by the cult leader was intoxicating, a siren song beckoning to the deepest recesses of his being. With that power, he could end the suffering of billions, ensuring that no one would endure the horrors he had witnessed. But then, Dean remembered the look in James's eyes in his final moments. The grim determination as he sacrificed himself to save the galaxy. He knew this wasn't what his friend would have wanted. With a defiant resolve, Dean charged at the cult leader, his blade flashing in the dim light of the temple. The cult leader met him with a blast of raw cosmic power, the air crackling with eldritch energy. They fought amidst a whirlwind of steel and fire, ancient stones crumbling to dust around them as the temple shook with the force of their blows. In the end, it was Dean who emerged victorious, driving his blade through the cult leader's heart. Yet, even as the light faded from his enemy's eyes, Dean felt the toll the battle had taken on his own body. His skin charred and blackened, his bones shattered by the force of the cult leader's blows. As he lay dying, Dean's thoughts turned to James and the sacrifice he had made. He knew that the fight against the forbidden powers would never truly be over, but as long as there were those like him willing to stand against the darkness, there was still hope for the galaxy. With his last breath, he passed the mantle of leadership to his young apprentice, a fierce-eyed woman with a spirit as indomitable as James himself. Though the road ahead was long and uncertain, Dean knew that the guardians of the cosmic balance would stand ready, an eternal bulwark against the forces of chaos and destruction. If you appreciated this story and wish to show your support, please consider leaving a like and subscribing to our channel. Additionally, for each comment containing 88, I will heart every single one. Thank you for your time.